Honey, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby. That's a real phone call. Made from a prison cell, recorded by the system, and played for a jury. The voice on the other end belongs to Richard Allen, and those words, spoken to his wife on April 3, 2023, became the centerpiece of the Delphi murders trial. But Allen wasn't confessing to investigators. He was confessing to her. And the internet was already listening. This is only the first case. It gets worse from here. Before Richard Allen ever picked up that prison phone, there was another man who thought he'd figured out the perfect system. Someone who believed the internet was just a tool, and that tools don't talk back. Philip Markoff was, by every visible measure, exactly what you'd want a person to be. Medical student at Boston University, engaged to a woman named Megan McAllister. Tall, clean-cut, the kind of guy whose neighbors would later describe him as quiet and polite. He had a future mapped out. And somewhere underneath all of that, he had a second life that he was absolutely certain no one would ever find. Markoff used Craigslist. Specifically, he used it to find women offering sensual massage services. Women who had no way of knowing who was actually on the other end of those messages. In April 2009, he arranged a meeting with Julissa Brisman at a Boston hotel. She was 26 years old. He robbed her. And then he killed her. He had already robbed at least 2 other women through the same method, same platform, same approach, same belief that he was invisible inside it. He wasn't. The IP addresses tied to those Craigslist messages trace back to him. The email accounts he'd used, accounts he presumably thought were disposable, were not as clean as he believed. Within days of Brisman's murder, investigators had a name. Within 2 weeks, they had him in handcuffs. The entire architecture of his secret life, built carefully over time, collapsed because the platform he'd treated as a private hunting ground had been logging everything. And that's the thing that keeps pulling me back into these cases. Markoff wasn't careless in the way you'd expect. He wasn't sloppy. He wasn't impulsive. He was a medical student, someone trained to be precise, methodical, detail-oriented. He thought he understood the system well enough to use it without being seen. The digital trail said otherwise. But Markoff's story doesn't end with the arrest, or even the charges. It ends somewhere far darker, in a jail cell, on a specific date that matters, with a name written in blood on the wall. And that detail changes everything about how you read this case. August 15th, 2010. 1 year and 1 day after the date Philip Markoff was supposed to marry Megan McAllister. Instead, a deputy at Nashua Street Jail found him dead in his cell. And what they found when they pulled back the blanket was something a law enforcement source described, without embellishment, as a bloodbath. Markoff had spent his last hours constructing an exit so deliberate, so methodical, that it reads less like a breakdown and more like a final project. He fashioned a razor from a jail-issued pen and a piece of metal. He slashed major arteries in his ankles, his legs, his neck. He wrapped the wounds in plastic, pulled a garbage bag over his head, stuffed toilet paper down his throat so that no one who found him could reverse what he'd done. Then he covered himself head to toe with a blanket and waited. Before he went still, He used what was left to write two things on the wall. One word that looked like pocket, and a name. Megan. A law enforcement source said it plainly. He clearly knew what he was doing. This was his third attempt. The first came hours after his arrest. Leather strips from his boat shoes, tied together, looped around cell bars. The second came around the time Megan ended the engagement, each attempt more considered than the last. The suicide wasn't impulsive. It was the same careful, layered thinking he'd applied to everything else. Markoff spent his entire double life operating on the assumption that every piece of it was contained. The Craigslist messages were private. The hotel rooms were anonymous. The victims had no reason to suspect the clean-cut medical student on the other end. He believed the walls held. They didn't. And here's the thread that runs from Markoff's case directly into the next one. What he never counted on was that the internet remembers everything. And sometimes, so do prison phone lines. Markoff wrote Megan's name in blood on the wall. Not a confession, not an apology, just her name. Do you think that was guilt or control? Drop your answer in the comments, because the next case takes that same need to leave a mark and moves it somewhere far more public. 8 years after Philip Markoff's name first appeared on a Craigslist server log, a 13-year-old girl named Abigail Williams and a 14-year-old named Liberty German went for a hike on the Monon High Bridge Trail in Delphi, Indiana. It was February 13th, 2017. They never came home. Their bodies were found the next day, near the trail, with their throats cut. And the detail that makes this case unlike almost anything else I've come across, the detail that sat at the center of this investigation for years, is that Libby German had her phone out while it was happening. She captured him. Audio and video of the man who killed them, recorded in the moments before he did it. Investigators released portions of it publicly, hoping someone would recognize the voice, the face, the walk. They put it out there and waited. For 5 years, no arrest came. Here's the part that changes everything. When investigators finally re-examined a tip that had been sitting in the case file, largely overlooked, it pointed to a man who had been living in Delphi the entire time. Richard Allen worked at the CVS pharmacy in town. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't hiding in another state. He was there, in the same small community where 2 girls had been murdered for 5 years. He was arrested in October 2022. An unspent bullet found at the crime scene was matched to rounds test-fired from Allen's own gun. The case had been hiding in plain sight, in the same zip code, on the same main street, behind the same pharmacy counter, where people in Delphi picked up their prescriptions every week. But the recording and the bullet weren't what finally broke Richard Allen. He did that himself. From inside a prison cell. Richard Allen didn't confess once. He didn't slip up in an interrogation room. He confessed over 60 times. To his wife, to his mother, to the prison warden, to the psychologist treating him, to other inmates, to correctional officers who were legally required to document everything they heard. 60 times across months, to nearly every person who came within earshot of him. And every single word of it was being recorded. On April 3rd, 2023, Alan called his wife from prison. The jury heard the audio. "Honey, I did it. I killed Abby and Libby." His wife told him to stop. He repeated it. She told him again. He kept going. On May 10th, he called again. "I need you to know that I did this." Not a breakdown, not a ramble, a statement. Prison psychologist Monica Walla testified about her sessions with Alan. He told her he cut the girls' necks. He told her he covered their bodies with branches. And at one point, he told her something that has stayed with me since I first read it. "I just want to sign my confession. Not, I want to explain myself. Not, I want people to understand." He wanted to sign it like it was paperwork, like it was something that needed to be made official, something that had been sitting unsigned for too long. Both men had constructed a version of themselves for the outside world. Careful, deliberate, entirely convincing. And both were ultimately undone, not by investigators cracking a code, but by what leaked out in the spaces they believed were private. A Craigslist server log, a jail phone line. Both men trusted the walls around them. Neither wall held. The digital trail was there the whole time. Someone just had to be listening. Because Markoff trusted Craigslist the way you trust a locked door. Alan trusted a prison phone line the way you trust a private room. Both men were wrong. And both of them found out in the worst possible way. But their cases aren't anomalies. They're a pattern. And the pattern has a shape. The Delphi case didn't break because of a single detective working in isolation. It broke partly because the internet wouldn't let it go quiet. Reddit threads, true crime forums, amateur analysts running audio enhancement on a grainy video of a man walking across a bridge. None of that work directly arrested Richard Allen, but it kept the case alive in a way that official channels, stretched thin, moving on to newer cases, couldn't sustain alone. And the tip itself had been sitting in the file since the beginning. The information that eventually led to Allen's arrest wasn't discovered years later through some forensic breakthrough. It was already there. The digital trail, the physical evidence, the overlooked witness account. All of it existed before anyone acted on it. Markoff's Craigslist server logs were always there. Allen's prison calls were being recorded from the first one. The footage Libby captured existed the same day she died. These weren't secrets that were eventually cracked. They were confessions waiting for an audience. The dark web, private messages, prison phone systems, they all feel like walls. They aren't. They're archives. Every message, every call, every post is a timestamp on something that can be found. The question was never whether killers leave traces online. They always do. The question is, who finds them first, and how long it takes. Subscribe if this rabbit hole kept you watching. The next case file is already open.